Hello everyone, how are you today? I hope you're all well. Okay, so today we will be talking about strength-based coaching in the context of positive psychology. This is a really important topic as it approaches coaching and the individual client from a perspective of strength and empowerment, instead of focusing on dysfunction and weakness. I will also give you an explanation of how the concept of character strengths can be applied in practice and how it is incorporated into the ABC coaching framework, which I hope you've all encountered in the program. I think it's around the whole module 2 covers the ABC process. So before I start, I will dedicate time for questions every few slides. And if you can hold any questions in your mind until then, I would appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Now on to today's agenda. First, we will be looking at what positive psychology is and why it's important. Positive psychology is a relatively new approach in therapy and coaching, but it has already attracted a great body of research that proved its efficiency. Then we turn our focus to character strengths and virtues, and this is an even more recent advance in the study and practice of positive psychology. Thereafter, we look at how to assess your or your client's character strengths and how to fit such an exercise into the ABC coaching framework. We will then move on to discuss how to align character strengths with your goals or your client's goals, as it is a key objective that personal strengths can be developed and enhanced so that they support goal-directed behavior. Finally, we will explore ways to identify and develop the character strengths that would have the greatest impact on the success of you or your client. And finally, we conclude with a few reminders and notes and have an open Q&A session. But as I said, I think it's 2 or 3 times in the middle, there will be time for questions as well. So let's move on to positive psychology. Now, as I've alluded to before, it's an alternative to the conventional medical model that says that you identify and reduce dysfunctions and abnormalities first and try and treat and reduce them instead of focusing on the potential of well-being. By focusing on well-being rather than the abnormalities, you aspire more to meaning, achievement, engagement, relationships, and joy, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is far more effective to help a person move into the right direction and according to their needs. And as psychologists remind us, it is the only state where a person can flourish, as when you focus on the positives instead of going the direction of the negatives. And research has also shown that more than 40% of our happiness is absolutely in our control, and that's the activities and the attitude. And they have found that happiness, or the lack thereof, the other sources, external sources, are circumstances that we find ourselves in, and interestingly enough, our parents and our childhood home. Next, I want to take you through where positive psychology fits in. Now, this looks like a very busy slide, but it has positive psychology in the center. And then, as you can see in the darker yellow circles, it has an influence on positive coping, applied positive psychology, happiness and well-being, emotions and strengths and virtues. The last one that we will be focused on more toward the latter end of the session. I want to highlight two concepts here, and the first is the idea of the hedonic treadmill. So this is a naturally observed tendency of humans to return to a relatively stable level of satisfaction, despite having great ups and downs in terms of positive or negative experiences or events. So to try and put it in simpler terms, under great distress, we tend to bounce back. And on the flip side, when something really good happens, we are rarely satisfied for too long before we yearn for something more or something else. So we don't really stay satisfied for all that long. Hedonic also refers to physical or basic pleasures and needs, and is therefore lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs than eudaimonic aspects. And these, the latter, relate to self-development through learning and practice. And if you have a look at that diagram, you find the two in between positive psychology and happiness and well-being. So they both influence happiness and well-being, but just in a different way. So the second concept that I would like to highlight is the eudaimonic staircase. So note that it follows a different mechanism than the treadmill, because if it gets you from one rung of the ladder to the next, and you don't return to the same baseline every time. So effort consistently leads to the next level. So it may require more time and patience, but it's also more sustainable and lasting and ultimately satisfying. And this is the area that coaching ideally focuses on, because you want a sustainable and lasting growth of your client. And it also relates to Maslow's higher levels of self-actualization. So this is a quote from an article, from a research article, and they said that happiness generates success and success generates happiness. So this is the key foundation that the concept of positive psychology is actually based on. A next quote that tried to explain what positive psychology coaching is, and the authors explained it as a scientifically rooted approach to helping clients increase well-being, enhance and apply strengths, improve performance, and achieve valued goals. So as you can see here, these are all the basic outcomes that we are looking for in a coaching relationship and in a coaching plan. So as such, positive psychology coaching aspires to build the positivity, strengths, optimism, resilience needed to flourish, even if you go through challenging circumstances. So next, we look at the distinction between the two concepts that I've already mentioned, namely hedonic well-being or feeling good, and eudaimonic well-being or functioning well. So these are the two sides of coaching that you try to aspire to lead the client toward. And the first is the feeling good aspect, to build happiness and get life satisfaction, generate positivity, promote well-being, lead the client to develop their personal aspects and their personal skills. And it's got a good fit with life coaching if you look at all of those above. And of course, the end goal of both is for the client to flourish. Now, eudaimonic well-being or functioning well, you look for optimal functioning, and you look at strengths, developing strengths, and that's what we will focusing on from here onwards. It's geared towards improving performance, developing professionally, and it's got a very good fit with executive coaching. And I've mentioned the source there below for you if you want to follow it up later. Right, so coaching for positivity. Here, the aim is to build and utilize strengths rather than to get stuck on imperfections and limitations. Remember that I've said earlier that the medical model or conventional medical model of psychology is to really identify what is wrong with a person and try to fix that. Now, here in positive psychology, you're not trying to fix anything. You're trying to live the best life with what you have and try and build and develop those strengths that you do have. So you build on your psychological, social, intellectual, and physical resources. You always work against stress and negativity that may be in your life at any one time. And in the process, you identify key character virtues and strengths, because those will help you to move toward your goals. And the good thing about this is every person has a unique character profile, but you can enhance and develop it further to suit your needs and the goals that you want to achieve. All right, so it's time for questions. If any of you have any questions. If you have any questions, and you can post it in the chat. Let me just quickly have a scan through. Okay, Liz has asked, what is the best way to start a client off with this model? Liz, I'll get to that. This presentation is geared to start working with a client on the character strengths. So I'll go through the process of assessing the client or yourself, and then identifying the strengths that are most closely aligned with their goals, and then how to strengthen each of those character strengths. Then Nikita has asked, if clients start to go down the road of focusing on their weaknesses, how do we sway the conversation to a positive one? First of all, I can say that it's not always immediately possible. Sometimes a person's weaknesses or their problems can be so foremost in their mind that it almost block any of their ability to see their strengths. So you may decide what the level of their issues actually are. And then you need to find a balance and harmony first before you can move on to strengths. But a good way is actually just to start talking about strengths, start identifying strengths that the client have, and then just focusing on that, and it will become sort of natural for them to focus on that rather than their problems. Yes, Liza has asked, do we introduce the concept of positive psychology model through questioning techniques without explaining the process? Yes, I think that's the best way. It doesn't really make sense to go into the theory and the technical aspects with a client. So you'll just frame the questions in a positive way. And as you'll see a little bit later on, if you go through the process of working on character strengths, that will sort of become natural. Yes, Cheryl, I agree. They're not normally negative when we put them in a successful language. So that's another way. You can frame your questions differently. You can direct the whole nature of your discussion in a more positive way. Yes, Kelly, is there any tips, activity to help clients if they struggle to name their strengths? That is exactly what the assessment is for, that I'll be going through with you right now after this. It actually, the researchers, we'll see just now, but the researchers have identified 24 different character strengths. And they put together an assessment that is proven, scientifically proven to be correct and specific. And the outcome of that assessment is to rank your strengths from the most used to the least used. So it's not in terms of strongest to weakest necessarily, it's how and when you use it. So it's a good way to see, let's say, your top strength is creativity. So you can use those results then to discuss it further with a client. Christina, when a client's mind starts ruminating, is it okay to apply some yoga techniques such as pausing and guided meditation? Yes, of course it is. It's not necessarily geared towards character strengths, but it will certainly, for instance, you can use meditation to meditate on your values. And your values are a closely linked part to your character strengths as well. So you want to have those in alignment. So yes, you can definitely use yoga techniques and meditation for this purpose. And of course, I said before, part of positive psychology is to work on relaxing and to work against stress. And what better way than mindfulness, yoga, and meditation to achieve that? Okay, Saloni, you have asked, when a client talks negative and is all confused, what do you do? I think you slowly move a person, you frame all your questions and your discussion with the person in line of being more positive. And as soon as you start to identify some strengths that the person have, you can focus more on that and try to work those against the negativity that he or she has, if that makes sense. So it's a good way, the assessment is a good way to start to have a client see that they've got strengths and not to always fixate, on the negative aspects. Okay, I think we can move on. I'll answer the rest of the questions, Meenakshi. I'll answer that in the next session. All right, so let's move on to the character virtues. Now, research by positive psychology guru Martin Seligman revealed well-being as linked to 6 virtues. Now, he named them or labeled them wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. And they highlighted the fact that every person has a unique constellation of strengths. And those constellation of strengths form a distinctive character profile. So every person, and this is very important to keep in mind, every person has got character strengths. So whether they are fixated only on their negatives, only on their weaknesses, you can always in this way turn it around and turn them to focus more on their positive strengths. And if possible, have that, later on outweigh the negatives that they see in themselves, because many of these strengths can actually overpower anything negative that they assume. So these are the qualities that come natural to a person. And the research has also shown that improving those, they say, make you 18 times more likely to thrive. So this is the difference if you can get a person to focus on the positive aspects rather than, just ruminating on the negatives the whole time. And they have gone further and divided these 6 virtues into 24 different character strengths. And you can just read through this. It's quite a bit of reading, but here are the first 4 virtues and the subdivisions underneath each. So under wisdom, you've got creativity, you've got curiosity, judgment, the love of learning, and perspective. Then under courage, you've got bravery, you've got perseverance, you've got honesty and zest. Zest is the enthusiasm for life, vigor, energy, and not doing things half-heartedly. That's actually a very good strength to have that is closely connected to passion. Then humanity is love, kindness, social intelligence. Justice is teamwork, fairness, and leadership. And remember that every person has got an individual combination of these that's ranked from those that they use and value highest to those that they use the least. The last 2 virtues, temperance and transcendence. Temperance is divided into forgiveness, humility, prudence, self-regulation, and transcendence into appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope, humor, and spirituality. And spirituality is the division or the strength that connects with your purpose and meaning too. So it doesn't only speak to having or being religious. And this is a system developed by the VIA Institute on Character. So I've added the link for you there if you want to go and have a look afterward. They have also designed the assessment. It's a free assessment that you can have that you can do yourself or have your clients do. And we at the Jay Shetty School have actually got our own link there. So you can just go into our link and just complete the assessment for free and then get your strengths ranked in order, or your client strengths ranked in order of how much they're being used in order. Right, so how do we analyze our character strengths? The first 2 steps are actually very important to note right from the start, and that's that they say, the researchers say, that only 1/3 of people are actually actively aware of their strengths. And if you remember back to module 2, awareness is actually the first step of change, and therefore it is the first step of the ABC coaching framework. that the Jay Shetty program is built around. So I mentioned the free VIA survey, and it's a validated tool that ranks your strengths from the most used to the least used. Now, I'll explain a little bit later on what you actually do with the outcome or the results and how you implement it in terms of the ABC framework. The VIA 120, the one mostly used, has got 120 multiple choice questions, and it takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete. And I've added just one sample survey question here. It states being able, so these are all statements, by the way, that you've got to rank from very much unlike me, neutral like me, and very much like me. So this statement says being able to come up with new and different ideas is one of my strong points. So this is connected to creativity. And if you, for instance, choose very much like me, and you answer similarly on the other statements associated with creativity, that will rank quite high. So you're starting to get the idea of how this assessment works. So it's time for a few more questions. Let me just see if I can open the questions here. Right. Meenakshi, you've asked, can we find through their strengths what makes them happy and focus on those areas and teach them to apply this mindset when they go toward the feeling of stress and sadness? Yes, absolutely. If you, for instance, find that for a client, let's say creativity comes out quite high, then you can direct them towards doing these activities, doing something creative, using creativity maybe to solve problems, using creativity to try and achieve their goals, or using creativity and things that make them feel happy and accomplished and find meaning and purpose. So absolutely you can do that, and the same applies to anything else. If you look at kindness, or you look at love, or social intelligence, or judgment, or any of the other strengths, you can then direct the client to do those activities, to enhance those strengths even. And later on, I'll show an example of how you can enhance some of these strengths. Now, we won't have enough time, of course, to go through all 24, but I'll propose some reading that you can do to read about whatever strength comes out on top, or strength that you need to enhance to achieve a goal or be more happy and satisfied, and then you can work on that. Saloni, that's a very good question. It's actually quite alongside my background as a forensic psychologist, how to convince a client who is aggressive and don't want to help themselves. That's very, very difficult. The only thing that you can hope for, and it's sometimes not possible, is to try and have them build awareness that something is wrong, that they are a part of the problem, and that they can actually change it. If you're not able to convince them of that, it's terrible to say, but if a person don't think that they're part of the problem and they don't see the need for help, then, you know, I won't assume that they will approach you as a coach anyway. Monique says that she did the survey and strongly recommended. I agree, I did it as well. Sometimes there can be surprises. Sometimes it tells you what you sort of instinctively already knows. But it's a very good idea to do it with clients as well. Not only will they become aware of strengths that they have themselves, but you will also get some information on them and able to use it to move them forward and to know how you can move them forward. Cindy, you asked, may we get a copy of this deck? This presentation will be sent out to all of you guys. It's got the link a little bit later on, a link to the assessment in it as well. So yes, absolutely. You will get a copy of the recording of this presentation too. Kelly, you wrote that the tool will look at most used and least used strengths. Naturally, you ask how will they determine their natural strengths. Now, usually a person move instinctively toward using their natural strengths. Now, as you'll see later on, it's not necessarily those strengths that will best help you achieve your goals. So what we will explain later on, just here after, is how to look at your goals and align your goals with the strengths that you need to achieve those goals. And if any of those strengths are rated a little bit lower, you can do the exercises and the practices and so on to enhance and to strengthen it so that they will support your goals better. Is it possible that a client's strengths will vary from time to time? Lisa wrote. Could awareness change where their strengths fall in more to less use? Yes, to both questions. A client's strength is relatively fixed, but it can change with time and with circumstances. It won't change quickly, but most certainly if one talks about over a duration of years, it may change. So I don't think there's any reason to test it more times than once a year at the very most. But testing it, let's say every second year is a good idea. And you can see as your circumstances change, of course, you'll need to use different strengths as well. And they will either naturally or with practice, they will enhance and strengthen. Uriel, you asked, would it be a good idea to use the VIA assessment in the same session of the Wheel of Life? What I'm actually going to suggest in the very next slide is to give it to the client as homework in the same session as the Wheel of Life, but I'll discuss it a little bit further on right now on the next slide. Andrew, you wrote, what instrument would you use to help a client bring awareness to their negative thought patterns? That is mostly a discussion. The exercise that helped the most with this is actually to use a daily thought journal. So they write down all their distressing or negative thoughts as they become aware of it on a daily basis. It's a little bit off topic here, but you will then ask them to look for patterns in those thoughts. Now, usually there are researchers have distinguished 10 automatic negative thought patterns. And what you have the client do then is you have them fit those patterns that they've noticed into one of those 10 areas. And each of those 10 areas have a way of how to question those thoughts, whether they're accurate, whether they are maybe conditional, whether they're logical, for instance. What evidence do they have that the thoughts that they have are actually correct, or not correct, and then they can start working on either redirecting those or formulating healthier alternatives. So the best instrument is actually to do a daily thought journal. Monique, that's interesting. You say that you've learned a few things about yourself. That often happens as well, and that's where the awareness comes in too. So you maybe weren't really aware that you were using something quite often, and as soon as you become aware of it, you can utilize it better and more effectively and more appropriately in situations. Rachel, the survey, the link to the survey is in the presentation, and the presentation will be sent out to all of you guys. Yes, Nicole, I think the best would be to have the client, to give the client the link and have them do it outside of the session as homework, and then just bring the results with, and you can discuss it together. Yes, Meenakshi, that is the link. Now we've got a dedicated link for the Jay Shetty School to do the assessment. So that link is a little bit later on in the presentation. Yvonne, I'll come to your question in the next section. Right, let's move on. Right, so as I said, in the next slide, I will discuss where to fit it in the general progress or progression of the ABC framework. Now, as you may recall, if you've done module 2 already, there are 9 steps in the ABC framework. The first 3 are the A's, and then the 3 B's and the 3 C's. And usually you do the Wheel of Life in the ordered step, so step 2. Now, I would, as I've said before, I would, in that same session, I would actually give the client a link to do the character strength test, him or herself, outside of the session. So they get the report and they get all those 24 strengths ranked. And you can also ask them to think about it a little bit, you know, before the next session, and then bring the results and their thoughts with. And some good questions to ask them is whether there were any surprises for them and what they were. And that will really help for them to gain insight as well. Maybe it's there are a couple of strengths that they are aware of using regularly and that they rely on, and maybe there are some that they use regularly that they don't really know or haven't realized that they rely on. And often it also happens that there are strengths toward the bottom that they thought they were using more than they actually were, or relying on more than they actually were. Now, in the next couple of slides, I'm going to describe how you align these strengths with the goals, that the big goal that you set with your client, or even the smaller goals if you've broken them up. Now, when you do that for this purpose, you'll do that as part of either the 4th step, big goals. So just after you've set a big goal, or as part of building habits. So as a part of where you've broken up the big goals into smaller steps, and you start talking about resources that the client need to achieve these smaller steps. And a strength is a skill, so it's actually part of the resources that they may need to achieve their goals. So it's like a two-step process. The assessment, I think, can take place right after the Wheel of Life. And then where you discuss the goals can take place a little bit later when you start or have set one or more goals with the client. So this is where you slot in the assessment and then the alignment of character strengths. And I think it's a pretty natural match with the ABC framework. So it works out pretty nicely when you place it one on top of the other. So as I've said, the assessment ranks your often used strengths from top to bottom. And remember that a bottom ranking does not equal a weakness. It's just not used that often, or you may not give it priority in the circumstances that you are, in the work that you do, in the context that you find yourself in. So I've explained how it's used in conjunction with the ABC framework. And the objectives of knowing these strengths are to enhance your top strengths that support your goals and to develop underused strengths to support your goals. So, what do you do next? How do you align your or your client's strengths with the goals? So firstly, if you have a SMART goal with your client already, you examine it in the context of the character strengths. And you ask yourself, which strengths do I most need to achieve this SMART goal? And here you don't look at your ranking at all. You look at all 24 strengths and you look at which 3 strengths do you need or do you think will mean most for you to achieve your goal? If any of the 3 strengths that you identified are underused toward the bottom of your results, then you know you've got to work on it a little further. So the best thing is to develop daily practices like a habit almost to work and strengthen each of these aspects. So you take each 3 of the strengths, whether they're at the top, but especially if they're at the bottom, in turn, and you write down 2 to 3 simple things you can do right now to enhance or develop it. Now, as I said in the book that I've listed later on, there's actually a list of things that you can do, 3 or 4 things for each of these 24 strengths that you can use or do to work on it. I've got a file with it. Now I'll have a look to distribute it to you guys as well, maybe as part of the next weekly newsletter, so that you can have a good idea. It's pretty summarized, so it may just say do a daily journal, for instance, or do a gratitude journal, but you'll have a pretty good idea of what to do, what you can do each day to develop any of these strengths. So I've named a couple of examples. The first one, to develop hope. You can make sure that you reach out once every day and make a difference to some situation, to someone's life. So every day you reach out and you can write down your experience, what you've done and your experience, how it made you feel, and what difference did you notice. You can write all of those down in your journal every day. For example, to enhance perspective, you can focus all of the time in any engagement, in any conversation, focus on listening before sharing, before talking, even before questioning. And this is actually a very good skill to have as a coach, because your whole idea and your whole objective is to encourage the client to almost speak at their own pace, and not to interject too much or to speak too much yourself or to have to question too much. So the third thing to build social intelligence, you can practice noticing, labeling, and expressing your emotions. This is also a very good thing because it teaches you to move a little bit deeper into your own inner experiences. So every day in every engagement that you have, you can just try and, if it's only once, it's fine, notice, label, and express an emotion that you have at that time. So I've already mentioned it's a good idea to ensure that you build these steps as a new habit. So you've got to do them on a daily basis. And then you can write down every day in your journal the impact it has on your life, whether you notice anything different, whether you think you are using that particular strength better, whether you think it's now in a better position to help you achieve your goals, and how it makes you and other people around you feel. And you can help make reminders and affirmations to help you remember these strengths, and that it's always at the forefront of your mind. Now we're going to do some questions again quickly before moving to the last two slides. I'm just going to stop the sharing again and let's see if there are new questions. Any of these questions, by the way, that I don't get to now, I'll make sure that I'll answer one or two of them in the next newsletter that goes out on a weekly basis. Diana, when doing a SWOT analysis, the S, is that where the strengths should be analyzed according to these tools provided here? Yes, but it's not the only strengths. A SWOT analysis is usually much wider, so it can be, it can even be some external things that are your strengths. For instance, it can be functions like your marketing is very strong, your business sense is very strong. So it's not necessarily these character strengths, but it can include those as well. Yes, Monique, I agree. It's super important that we emphasize that low ranking is not, the person should not see it as a weakness. It's just not something that they have used, and maybe they don't have a reason to use it, for instance. I'm always thinking about somebody in a really serious position that don't maybe use humor, and it's because it may not be beneficial for them to use it in the circumstances and context that they're in. So they may need to use love and kindness more, or gratitude, for instance. So it's definitely not a weakness. Whenever a person is put in a situation where they would benefit from the strength that they previously had not used as much, they will probably with time start to develop and use those more. Thanks, Monique. I love the idea of making the steps to build and enhance strengths part of habits, as well as turning into affirmations. So you can put a little reminder, a sticker somewhere, to be grateful, or to every day think of 3 things that you're grateful for, or do something special for a person to develop kindness, for instance. Always think, express your emotions, for instance, to build social intelligence. So yes, that's very important. I've got some questions and answers in the Q&A as well. Maybe I shall do those toward the end. So let's just quickly go through the last two slides. Right, there's the link to do the free survey. I think this will be sent out tomorrow, but if you are quite eager to do it beforehand, you can write it down, copy it down quickly. It's a short registration process, basically asking just for your name and surname and email address, and then you've got access to the survey and the results at the end. And this is the book that explains it in more detail by the developers of the program. It's a great book, and throughout the book it has practical ideas and exercises that you can use to strengthen each of these virtues and strengths. But as I said, I'll put it together for you guys. 3 or 4 exercises or things that you can do, activities that you can do to help developing those. And that is the Amazon link for the book. And finally, just some notes and things to remember. So you help a client work from a position of strength rather than from a position of issues, weakness, and imperfections. Lower ranked strengths are not weaknesses, and this you should really imprint for yourself and your clients. Knowing your strengths equals awareness, and awareness, as we all know, is the basis of positive change. You can build the right strengths to support your goals. So you identify those strengths that you need, and then you work on developing or building them as daily habits. Everyone has a unique set of strengths, and a good reminder is also to acknowledge your and others, including your client's strengths, when you notice them using it. All right, so final question time. We've got time for a couple of questions. Couple of final questions quickly. I'll go through to the Q&A. Cheryl, yes, I think I've answered your question. This seems to line up directly with the ABC. Will there be specific strategies and activities? Yes, every one of the strengths have a certain couple of activities that you can do, and you can use your creativity and think of those that will help you, that you know you will help you, or from experience you know may help your client. Or you can use those that I will suggest in the list that I will send out. Yes, Uriel, the VIA assessment is free to use. If the client, Cassandra, if the client wants to focus on something that they feel is lacking, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. That's their prerogative. And that's part of them setting their own, being empowered to set their own objective. And they may feel, remember that I said that they've got their own goals, and they decide which 3 strengths they would need to fulfill those goals. And it may be that a strength is, as you say, lacking, but not really lacking. They're just not using it as much as they should or could. And then you can help them focus on that. Meenakshi, how can one know the client's positivity level? The best way is actually to ask them. You've got a technique where there's a rating scale, which you can ask a client how confident they feel on a certain topic or in a certain area or in a certain activity, or how positive they feel on a scale from 1 to 10. It's almost like doing the Wheel of Life, just with a different question. So how positive they feel, and they may say they're on a 3, and you can ask them, why do you say that? And you can ask them also, where would they like, or where would they like to be? Where do they think they can be or want to be in 3 or 6 months' time? And then you can figure out together how they can get there. Anna, how can you help the client that has a negative mindset? That is pretty natural as well. And there are two techniques. You can either try and offset it by focusing on the strengths here, and you will probably use both, or you can use the negative thought process that I've discussed before. So have a look at when, why, with whom, and in which circumstances they have negative thoughts, and then try and redirect them, test the negative thoughts, redirect them to see if they can't turn it into something positive. All right, it seems that time is up. So thank you very much all. I think I've answered all the questions as well. But thank you very much for attending, and I hope you found it very useful, and feel free to post whether you've tried the assessment, whether you've tried it with a client, and what your results were. I'd love to hear about that. Thank you, guys.